There we go. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna just you guys. Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna start. Good. Okay, hey everybody. We've got some folks still signing in the room, but if I could get your attention, we are gonna get started. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Laura Swanzarek. I'm the Executive Director of Tacoma On the Go. We are the nonprofit advocate and resource for all things transportation in Tacoma. Really excited to be able to have this conversation today and to have it in a hybrid format. So thank you to all of the people who are here in the room with us today, but we are equally grateful for everyone that is tuning in on Zoom. For our 2026 Friday Forum series, we are exploring different ways that we can increase connection in our communities through discussions on policy, mobility, and how local leaders can work together. Today, we are very excited to be in conversation with Tacoma Mayor Anders Ibsen and Pierce County Executive Ryan Mello. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the forum, and because we have so many people with us today, we're doing things a little bit differently than usual. So if you're in the room, you're going to see QR codes on the tables or on the screens. Please submit your questions into the form on the QR code. If you're on Zoom, just put it in the Q&A on Zoom. And I'm going to do my best to try to get the big themes of these questions, but I probably will not ask your specific question because we're anticipating a lot of them and we have a limited amount of time. And we are going to stay centered on issues around transportation and mobility. With that, I want to introduce our moderator, Tanisha Jumper. Tanisha is the Chief Communications Officer for Tacoma Public Schools. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I have been anticipating this conversation since me and Laura kind of started thinking about who we're going to have. For those that you don't know, I have a long history with both of these guys. Since I think it's been 11 years since I've been back in Washington, 10 years since I'm doing this. In the first half of those years, I was working with both of them as council members. So very excited to have this conversation. Love you both. Think you guys are both great. So I'm going to kick it off today with everybody knows who you are, so you don't have to introduce yourself. But maybe what's the thing right now? We're starting spring. What's the thing that's bringing you joy right now? Because I think sometimes people forget that you guys are two regular guys. So, Andrew, good.
All right, Tanisha, thank you so much. Good to be among friends here. So, really easy answer today, and that's just family, my boy in particular. Very auspicious today because it would sometimes bring some privilege because we're going on a tour of the Tacoma rail yards. He's 4 and he loves trains. So all the challenges we're facing locally, regionally, federally, sometimes you just have to focus on just the irrational joy before we'll see something that inspires them and just taking inspiration from that too.
I love this question. Thanks for centering us on joy. There's so much that we worry about every day. I think the thing bringing me joy these days is the plans my partner and I are making with friends and family for the spring and summer travel plans, rooftop hangout plans. There's of activities here. So.
All right, we don't have a lot of time and these go fast all the time. So we're gonna kick right into it. So mobility needs rarely stop at jurisdictional borders. And what are your top priorities around transportation issues, and how can the city and county work together for more holistically to address those issues? I know a lot of these big projects have had starts and stops, and I know the council just wrote a letter to Sound Transit about another mobility issue. So how are you guys going to lean into that space? I'm gonna start with you.
Thanks, Tisha. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to see so many folks who care deeply about how our community grows and how it really is an interconnected community, right? We don't live our lives just in Tacoma. Those of us that live in Tacoma, I live in the north end of downtown with my partner, right? We travel through different cities and towns and even different counties, right? To live our life, to go play, to learn, to work, to live our life. So this question about interconnectedness is so important. Tacoma, even if Tacoma was doing absolutely everything 1,000%, that is great. And we still travel outside of Tacoma to live our life. And so it matters how we're growing, and what different parts of the county and region do directly impacts all of us. So I love this, and I really want to thank Tacoma On the Go for continuing to have these discussions about how we think about this and how we hold ourselves accountable. In the county, I'll mention just a couple of things, but I really want to mention there's a couple of my team members here who actually lead this work every day. They're very important to me. A lot of people are really important to me, but our Director of Planning and Public Works, Judge Diekman, and our Deputy Director for Planning and Community Development, Lauren Flemister, they lead the team that is doing a lot of the work that I get to talk about today, and they do an exceptional job doing it. And their teams do. So, top of mind for me, one is what's different is about safety. We are going all in on safety. This time last year, the Pierce County Council adopted the Vision Zero program that I sent to them. And this puts safety at the center of our public works department, right? Well, gone are the days of throughput being the number one thing that we measure and count against, and safety is now the number one thing that we measure. So our Vision Zero program is incredibly important to us. We are actively advancing it through a safe systems approach, right? For those who maybe are not super up to date on safe systems approach, the safe systems approach is an approach that really admits that humans are fallible and humans make mistakes, and we got to create a transportation system that acknowledges that humans are fallible. And so it takes a multidisciplinary approach to building out a transportation system and how we operate in it to put safety at the center. So our what we're doing with our county road system with safety in mind, our Americans with Disabilities transition plan is very important to us. Our trails plan, connecting trails from trails is a great example. People don't just like to recreate and bike ride within the city of Tacoma, right? People like to go to Puyallup or go to the mountain or go to other different places. We don't just stay within the four corners of the city limits. So safety's at the center. I'll also, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more later, Tanisha, but I also serve on the Sound Transit Board and the Pierce Transit Board. There's a lot of really important work going on with interconnectedness and mobility at the Sound Transit Board these days. How we make sure that when voters approved in 2016, how we can deliver, especially for Pierce County and connecting Pierce County to the rest of the region. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about what's going on there.
Thank you. So ultimately, it just means showing up for each other, because we don't have the luxury of doing anything else, especially with today's uncertainties that we're facing. And Sound Transit is certainly foremost in people's minds. We made very public statements to that effect as a city government. We not only need to get what's best for the downtown core and for our city, but also the region as a whole. This isn't even really just a Tacoma issue so much as completing the spine being good for Western Washington. That's the entire premise of Sound Transit. So just making sure that we're all filming together, not just as Tacomans, not even just as Pierce County residents, but as people who care about a connected, more just region. But the thing about jurisdictional connections is that it's not even just places in our backyard. It's really how Tacoma relates to everywhere else. So we were just in Washington, D.C. talking about major capital projects that impact our entire region and our economy, like Fish and Wharf Memorial Bridge, for example, Portland Avenue. areas that are crucial for our maritime trade and our freight mobility. And also it's really tempting to think of jurisdictional partnership as places outside of the backyard, like boundaries between the city of Tacoma and like the county, for example, like the unincorporated areas. And those are important, especially if we're thinking about things like bus rapid transit and for the resurrect that idea around Highway 7, which I don't think is a great idea to not give up on. For example, that there's so many good things I can come from that. But also when we think of jurisdictions, we also need to think of places inside Tacoma that are just different governments serving different things. So our schools, for example, or parks. The Safe Routes to School program, for example, is one of the most successful infrastructure investments that's further rooted in safety as well as justice, and undoing the effects of redlining and housing discrimination, for example, allowing us to double down on really successful council policy, like more trees, for example, and might grow there, as well as this. Thank you for our city council staff too, for making sure that we're not just making areas more vibrant visibly, but also very real public safety and quality of life implications too. So a lot of this is just being a better partner, showing up for our sister agencies, as well as supporting our federal and state delegations. And we actually have a unique opportunity, which you're going to hear as a broken record. I'm there after all. About the upcoming street measure this year. It is going to be extremely safety and mobility and interconnection focused. More on that later, but we also show up just by proving that local match and not just showing up with our words, but also with our deeds too.
Thank you. So I've got to see both of you work together in the past, and I know you have different styles, but you do have a lot of alignment, and I feel like if we were just gonna rely on the leadership of the city and the county to maybe figure some of these things out, we might have a chance, but we also have a federal government that's doing some interesting things, and I'll leave it at that. But what impacts are you anticipating from the federal government that will impact, local and infrastructure programs and your ability to get some of these things done? And how are you preparing and collaborating to work through that?
We have no choice but to anticipate chaos, right? I mean, if you tell people that Iran wars and stagflation even a couple of years ago, right? Just the sheer mind-boggling insanity, right? But we have to anticipate that, and we have to plan by building resiliency into our framework. So part of that is working with the good that already is happening at the federal level. So I mentioned Fishing World and Warren Bridge. I mentioned Portland Avenue, but we have had some very strong advocacy from our delegation. We're blessed to have really top-notch leaders at our House and Senate delegation, but also just proving that stability of the local match to those dollars. So that's going to be really crucial for us to be able to get that grant money. That's something that's really crucial about that kind of street measure, but also advocating for good policy. So the Basics Act, for example, which is a bipartisan bill working its way through, would provide that meaningful resiliency for that funding, so that we're not constantly just looking over our shoulder every time we try to plan long range. The other thing too is that transportation is not just transportation. It's taking a step back from all these individual projects. Something that we all know that doing this work is that there is no isolation. There is no segmentation between transportation and, say, housing or affordability or homelessness. That they're all deeply interconnected, and being more sensitive to that is really crucial. That's why I have to give very big kudos to Ryan's and Speaker Jenkins and others' work on what's called the Resiliency Hub, which is an ongoing multi-agency, multi-pronged approach for baking in longer-term security into the funding of crucial human services like housing, homelessness, food security. The city of Tacoma is very interested in supporting that to the greatest extent we can. And that's just the exact same rubric for overall the same problem, which is just showing up for each other and unfortunately anticipating chaos, but also building something that can survive and do even better once the chaos passes.
Thanks, Mayor, for the city's strong engagement in that resiliency hub. We'd love to talk to you afterwards if you're interested in this concept of this resiliency hub. It is our preemptive work to prepare this community in the face of extreme chaos by our federal government. Impacts from the federal government, they're real. We are seeing, since the beginning of the Trump administration, the beginning of last year, we're seeing everything from redirecting long-standing programs, federal programs that local communities across the country, red and blue, have been relying on for generations, multiple presidents, Republican and Democrat. So outright gutting of those programs is one real threat. Another real threat is the longstanding financial resources we've banked on for generations by the federal government, putting on the shorthand that we say is the federal government is putting coercive terms and conditions on grant agreements of all kinds. Human services, homeless housing, and public infrastructure, stuff, housing and public infrastructure, transit, our transportation network, things that we're mostly talking about today. The federal government, in order to have their way with their value system, has already, and we're taking them to court. So while we're dealing with it, we're taking them to court. And so far, we're winning. The higher education is dealing with this. Chancellor Knight's here, right? Everyone is dealing with this. K-12 education, everyone is dealing with this. But so what this means for those of you that haven't had the misery to deal with this is the federal government is literally in grant agreements saying you can't pull down this grant agreement to do basic things, replace a bridge, build a new roadway, build a trail system, buy buses, operate buses. They're basically saying, if you don't think like we think about immigration, and mind you, these terms and conditions that they're placing on these grant agreements are often incredibly vague, and they're incredibly vague on purpose. So they say, they'll literally say, if you do illegal diversity, equity, inclusion, with no definition. If you do, City of Tacoma, Pierce County, Cincinnati, Ohio, if you do illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion, you don't get this money. Oh, and by the way, if you're found guilty, you owe back the grant ×3. And we can put you in jail. I'm not exaggerating, it's not hyperbole. People who sign these grants for a living, like me, do this under perjury of law and what's called the Federal False Claims Act. So they put really serious penalties. And they're saying, great, if you do illegal diversity, equity, inclusion, or if you're a sanctuary community for immigrants and refugees, or your community provides abortion care, or you do what they don't want you to do about climate change. These are typically the handful, or gender ideology, which they also don't define, or gender ideology. These are the 5 things that they keep pressing in these federal grant agreements. If you do these things, then you don't get our money. I'm overly simplifying for the time that we have, but this is really what's going on. So what are we doing about it? Our recourse is to litigate. So Pierce County is a lead litigator in 3 different lawsuits. We have a webpage that we have dedicated to keep the community updated on this. You can go to piercecounty.gov/litigation tracker to find out more and track the lawsuits. There's other lawsuits that Attorney General Brown in this state is doing an amazing job of leading other attorney generals. And so far, knock on wood, we're winning. But the federal administration is looking at every way possible to not have communities like ours get these dollars and to really coerce us to have their way with their really, really draconian and conservative value system.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of focus in the state legislature on housing and transportation in the past few years, and there's been some progress and there's been some stallouts. Are there policies that are proving to be especially helpful in local government, or policies that maybe are getting in the way?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind in terms of helpful policy is just missing middle, is making sure that we are actually requiring local communities to not just plan for growth, but to afford people meaningful options for the biggest pain points, which, speaking as someone who works in housing as well, is entry-level housing for first-time homebuyers and rentals for families. And the way to get to that is absolutely need construction, but we also need additional tools such as conversion, condominiumization, multi-lawn units, and we need the attendant permitting, the attendant infrastructure to make these things cost-effective for builders and for homeowners. And so we have seen some progress. Very big shout out to Representative Maureen Levitt for her work on putting some meaningful teeth into this as well, because one of the recurring themes of being an urban community is that oftentimes you're not always surrounded by jurisdictions who have the same feeling of urgency about some of these policies. In particular, there's always been this recurring resistance to, basically not in my backyard, maybe types of attitudes in some cases, allowing for different housing options, whether it's about houses or whether it's about perceptions of the right? There's always a certain resistance there. And thanks to the work of Representative Levitt, they actually set penalties if cities put meaningless, arbitrary barriers in the way of new housing supply. Then speaking of transportation, they actually lose some of that money, and it's reprioritized for communities that actually see the need and are going to do it. I'd really love to see that for homelessness services, by the way, because we have very similar dynamics going on in certain instances throughout the state. But that being said, there is some very productive ongoing conversation now around too, and that's again the same spirit of this not just being an isolated transportation forum and conversation, but just an intimate connection between getting from point A to point B, but also being able to afford point A, being able to afford the things at point C, and everything in between. So those are a couple of recurring themes there. Also our tax system. That is both an opportunity as well as a recurring challenge, because we have to pay for all these things. And it is certainly encouraging that we've made some strong inroads in the last legislative session. By far not a perfect product, but slowly beginning to move away from being the most unfair taxes in the entire United States towards something that's a bit less regressive. And there's obviously going to be years of litigation, probably a corporate-funded ballot measure repeal and so forth, but those are steps. But the relationship between the state and the local governments is always problematic, because the income tax is paired with state tax, sales tax money that benefits cities. And so then we have to have a conversation about, yeah, there's less progressivity, and yeah, there's less of an overall sales tax burden, but we're also kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because now we have to make sure we're putting customer services people. So a little bit more forward thinking for some of those avenues would be great. And then also just urban tools. So there have been some great conversations about various programs, like the conversion of service level parking lots to additional housing opportunity, for example. That's a great work that Senator Trudeau's done on behalf of Tacoma. Commercial to residential conversion, so that areas with weaker markets for things like retail, but stronger markets for residential can just allow more people to go where the market is going to just generate that feet on the street. And then just making sure that whether it's DNR or other agencies, that we have the programs funded that we not only want but desperately need for creating that urban sense of scenery, like say trees, for instance. I mean, it's no secret that urban tree canopy is really lacking in Tacoma. And again, it's not just about transportation or issues in isolation, but it's about livability and equity. And the more that we can work proactively with all our partners, the state included, the faster we'll get to our goals and people will be better.
Thank you. Before I let Ryan answer, remember the QR codes if you have questions, so that we can give Laura time. So she's not scrambling like I usually am. Give my pieces of paper all into that stuff. All right, you have to answer that.
Yeah, luckily our legislature has taken really renewed interest in housing and transportation policy, and we're really grateful for that. One of the things local governments like the city of Tacoma and Pierce County have the responsibility to do is to plan for the future, right? So we call our plans for the future our comprehensive plans in local government. It's literally our 20-year growth strategy for housing, transportation, economic development, all in one plan. How are we planning for that growth, looking 20 years out? I'm really proud of the growth plan that the county adopted at the end of 2024. And one of the first bills I got to sign as the county executive early in 2025. Our planning department did an incredible job of leading this effort with deep community engagement. One of the major outcomes of the newly adopted comprehensive plan for Pierce County is we are preparing zoning and with infrastructure investments, all the things. The new comprehensive plan paves the way for 250,000 new housing units in Pierce County. That is huge. And they're in the right areas. They're not sprawling on rural lands. We chose what's called the high capacity transit option of the plans. We could have done sprawl. We could have been NIMBY. We chose the growth plan tied to high capacity transit. This is transformative. 250,000 new units, that is huge. And we're working really hard to now implement it, right? One of the many elements that you'll find in our plan as well that I'm really proud of, and state it happened to be a state mandate, but right, local governments can listen to state mandates and they can kind of sort of do them, half-ass do them. They can outright ignore them, or they can embrace them. Like this is what happens in the real world, right? A lot of times the legislature says you should do X, Y, and Z about housing or transportation or climate. And a lot of times cities are like, don't want to do it. And they figure out how to not do it. Happens all the time. I'm really grateful that the leadership of Pierce County is moving us forward, planning for the real growth that is coming here. Like I said, with our comprehensive plan, and one of the elements in the comprehensive plan, how do you get to all this density? First of all, we actually retracted our urban growth area, right, to actually stop sprawl into rural areas, onto farms and forests. We actually retracted our urban growth area by about 1,100 acres, a retraction of the urban growth area. When's the last time that's happened? And there's a really important element of the comprehensive plan, right? If you read the comprehensive plan is literally that thick. One of the important elements is the transportation element. And this was a requirement of the legislature, a big requirement of the legislature to plan for transportation and multimodal transportation and climate. Again, I've seen many communities just sort of like, not really gonna pay attention to that, don't want to do it. We're taking the multimodal element really seriously. And if you read our comprehensive plan and see the work that we're doing, we're actually planning for what's called a level of traffic stress. So this is a term you're going to hear more about. We're actually looking at every roadway in Pierce County and saying, okay, on that roadway, how stressful is it for a walker and runner? How stressful is it for someone riding a bicycle or pushing a stroller or in a wheelchair or someone taking transit? So we're putting a level of stress designation on all of our roadways. And then that helps us then understand what the level of stress for all users. And then when the level of stress does not meet our expectations, it gives us an opportunity to make change, to get to a basic level of stress for all users. Everyone deserves to have a safe way to get around. So that's a totally new way of thinking about it. And the point I'm trying to make, Tanisha, is like taking this seriously, right? Not just improving it and saying, no, thank you, legislature, very much, actually embracing it and doing something meaningful about it.
I mean, we talked about it a lot about the invisible cost of transit, and like depending on where you are socioeconomically, that like you're paying either money or time, and depending on where you're at, like these things are either really big deals or just minor inconveniences. And like the idea that when you build with growth and transportation in mind, transportation, the light rail, trains up to Seattle and back to Tacoma, all those things become normal parts of your day and functioning parts of your day. And we're right, for the last couple of years, we've been talking about it, we're right in this really weird spot of we want them, but we don't really support them. We lean in, but we don't really lean in. So it's like this weird middle where it's not like, New York, you're gonna see everybody on the street. You're gonna see business people, you're gonna see moms with kids, you're gonna see, people that are struggling. Everybody's gonna be on the train together. Here, it's very like certain populations use it and the rest of us don't think about it. And I think, thinking about it in that way, we're thinking about, is it comfortable for me to walk on the street? Because I might want to walk, but if it's not safe, it's not comfortable, if I've got to worry about cars coming too fast, I'm not gonna do it. As someone who lives in unincorporated Pierce County who has no sidewalks. Yeah. Okay, make sure you send any questions in, because we're gonna get there in just a second. Transportation issues intersect with many other policy areas, particularly housing, affordability, and public health. What are your priorities in 2000 for the rest of this year and the rest of kind of the near future? And how do you see these things intersecting? I think there's a lot of people who, I think you said it earlier, and it's like, we don't live in a vacuum and we just care about transportation or just care about health. Like, we really do live in a place where we're living our lives and involved into these things. So there's been lots of conversations about public health lately. There's been lots of conversations about affordability of people having, and I got a call from a reporter the other day about why are kids moving up to Tacoma? And it's like, that's a very complicated question. And so, you know, what are your priorities around that? What are some of your thoughts? And Brian, why don't you start?
Well, we're very much focused on implementing the comprehensive plan that I began sharing with you today. So a lot of work to actually implement the details and really create communities. You know, our land use, our responsibility for land use and transportation and planning for housing is largely in the unincorporated area, right? Which is where about half of the people in Pierce County live. Half. Well, a little over 460,000 people live in unincorporated Pierce County. So that's what our jurisdiction is for land use and public works and all those things. We play a major role in housing supports and housing supply countywide, and of course, transportation countywide. But for our land use responsibility, it's in unincorporated Pierce County. So with that in mind, you know, my priorities for this year are continuing to implement our comprehensive plan, which means working with communities, doing things like deep community planning. So we have the big, huge comprehensive plan. Now it's like getting down to the neighborhood level, Parkland and South Hill, and actually working with the neighbors to implement the thing. What do you want to see this community to look like? How do we create a community where people don't need to get into their car for every darn thing to live their life? So that's a big part of what we're up to. Right on that, in partnership with the city of Tacoma, we've begun discussions with the mayor and his team about future annexation of Parkland. Parkland is in what is called the annexation area for the city of Tacoma. This has been the long-term vision for decades. It's in the annexation area, the future annexation area for Tacoma. I didn't just make a statement, it's been on that for a long time. It's not breaking news. But I don't think anyone has ever taken it super seriously and said, hey, Tacoma, Pierce County, let's get serious about how do we really truly in the near term prepare Parkland to be part of Tacoma, to be annexed by Tacoma. So a lot of work goes into that. So that's a big part of it. And I maybe the last comment I will make on this question at this point is, you know, my focus for 2026, in addition to what I just said, I would keep you all day with but I would just offer our work with Pierce Transit to make sure Pierce Transit has the financial resources to actually grow their service is really a really big focus of mine for 2026. And my work on the Sound Transit Board to protect our Pierce County investments with Sound Transit. That in the housing transportation space, that's where a lot of my attention is.
So Ryan mentioned earlier about the necessity of having local leadership that actually gives a damn about these goals that the state lays out, for example, for things that we all agree are really crucial priorities like housing, equity, transportation, mobility, and so forth. What's equally important is giving a damn about the policies that we ourselves have already passed, right? And speaking as someone who worked with Tanisha back during her, I know basically, in her previous role, it's basically the chief strategist of the city of Tacoma, helping devise the Tacoma 2025, Tacoma 2035. And there's a lot of work there in terms of, you know, having these disparate and 40-some strategic plans that don't talk to each other, right? And so there's really something to be said for brilliance and brevity, just doing a few things really well. So what that looks like in here and now, for example, like transportation, safety, and otherwise, is that we're actually fleshing out the city manager work plan, and we're aligning that with council goals. And there's going to be an incredible focus on things like mobility and safety, for example, how trees intersect with safety and livability and economic development and so forth. And also just the equity index. Equity is not just a performative boilerplate, you just check the box, you're good, but meaningful, tangible goals that you can associate with it. So for example, instead of just saying, hey, we want more trees, you can say, hey, we want a lot more trees in the South End, for example, and you know, traditionally neglected spaces, you know, also sidewalks or other key infrastructure pieces. Relating to our major initiatives, like the street measure you're going to see in August, for example. Yes, you are going to see more lanes, not more lanes hopefully, but more miles of streets paved and just better maintenance. But you're also going to see a significantly greater focus on mobility, on Vision Zero type goals, but also equity. So just making sure that traditional neglected neighborhoods really feel love this investment. That there's a greater role for partnership and maximizing these dollars for the sake of our sister agencies like the school district, or the Safe Routes to School program, for example. Parks Tacoma is really interested in safe routes to parks, the equivalent. I'm all about that, for example. Also, crucially, this is a fantastic transformative opportunity for workforce development. So instead of just looking at this as a one-time opportunity for capital improvements, how about actually build an opportunity for Tacoma kids, for people who are graduating and want access to a fantastic opportunity to skill trades, partnering this measure with meaningful contract reforms to allow for greater emphasis on companies with a great record of safety, apprenticeship utilization, and other aspects of what we call workforce development, community inclusion, other related policies. So really using this to build the economy locally built out instead of just in the abstract. And also speaking of transit, as Ryan mentioned, really laying the groundwork for some meaningful, transformative, multimodal, like transit work development type possibilities. I will continue making the drum for resurrecting the ideal, the dream of 507, for example. Imagine, perhaps in a more forward-thinking context, but you need to imagine how cool it would be to have real transit work to development, all the way from Lincoln District down through Stanway, for example, and just really delivering on the goals that the state says we need to do that are objectively good for others. And then finally, of course, we need fun buses.
Yeah. So I'm talking about buses, right? Pierce Transit is one of the lowest funded transit agencies in the state. And a couple of months ago, my seasons run together, so I apologize. We talked about, the levy, Pierce County levy, and transit levy. How can local transit be improved? And what do you see as some strategies as a community we should be working on and focusing on today?
Pierce Transit in particular. So as I noted, one of my main responsibilities is serving on the Pierce Transit Board. So I and 9 others govern Pierce Transit. We're having really exciting conversations about the future of Pierce Transit. Ridership has, I'm really excited to say that ridership has recovered from the pandemic, like ridership took a nosedive during the pandemic, like a lot of things in life. Ridership has recovered from pre-pandemic levels. That's really exciting. People really want and need the service. The Youth Ride Free program, funded by the Climate Commitment Act, the State Climate Commitment Act. Who pushed that?
Oh, okay, good.
is super exciting. It's really important to our young people who are finding independence to ride on transit, to get to school, to get to after school employment, to get to after school activities. And we track that use of Youth Ride Free, right? It is off the charts. It's super exciting. When you look at Pierce Transit compared to other transit agencies, especially in Western Washington, we collect about 2/3 of the revenue compared to our peers for a very growing community. So for a long time, Pierce Transit has collected 6/10 of the legislature tells the local transit agencies what your revenue tools are, right? We don't get to choose what our revenue tools are. The legislature dictates. So Pierce Transit collects 6/10 of a penny. By law, Pierce Transit can go to 9/10 of a penny to fund its service. Most of our peer agencies, transit agencies, collect 9/10 and have done so for some time. So what we're not able to do because we don't have the revenue, worthy of this community, is the frequency of routes that are needed to serve the community. Right, we need to get to a place where you actually don't need a timetable. You don't need to be like, oh, when's this bus coming? Did I miss the bus? If I missed the bus because I'm like rushing out of my house or work because the meeting ran late, like you shouldn't stand in the rain for another 45 minutes to wait for the bus, right? That's not acceptable. We need to have much more frequent bus service so folks can rely on transit without having to look at a timetable. It needs to come earlier in the day so that folks, who have to head to work or school at 7 a.m. can rely on it, and those getting off of shift work or whatever, long into their night, can be having a good time out and about. So 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, like you deserve to have a system that helps you live your life, how you live your life. So better span of service, earlier in the day, late at night, and more frequently, so you don't need a darn timetable and to memorize the bus schedule. You shouldn't have to memorize the bus schedule. And the state's resources. So the Pierce Transit Board is actively evaluating what does that look like? Where are the new routes? Last thing else, like, because we haven't really had the opportunity to add routes to the system for some time. With the new Maritime 253 Skills Center opening on the other side of the Theophilus Waterway, as an example, right? There's all these new, really exciting places that Pierce Transit doesn't currently serve. Pierce Transit doesn't serve Point Ruston. They don't serve the other side of the Theophilus. We don't serve Puyallup very well. There's lots of places that we can serve better. With better frequency and better span of service. And the board is actively thinking about that. And I think there very well may be an opportunity for later this year for the voters to be able to say yes to a plan that funds that vision.
As you saying, the youth ridership is up and thinking about those places that the bus doesn't go. There's a conversation happening right now about the lack of recreational activities for older youth. It's just but the teenagers, high schoolers, and not being able to get to places to just hang out and be kids. It's kind of hard if you don't have a car, you don't have someone to drive you. So that's a really important thing. And thank you for your early work on making that happen. So
what Tanisha was mentioning is we were the first community to pilot youth ride free. Courtney Chamberlain, who's in the house. We used a very small portion of the Tacoma Creates funding, a very small portion of Tacoma Creates funding. We said to ourselves, great, the voters in Tacoma said yes to Tacoma Creates to fund after school time activities and neighborhood activities for families all across the city. But how are kids and families going to get there? So we dedicated a very modest amount of Tacoma Creates to say, great to have programming, you've got to be able to access it. So we piloted this concept of youth ride free with Tacoma Creates money, which then turned into a signature item in a state transportation bill that made youth ride free everywhere throughout the state. So really excited to go to Tacoma.
Yeah, I love honesty. It's so great. So, and so I keep calling you Anders. I should be respectful. Mayor Ibsen. We've done a lot of really cool work together, and I really appreciate that. But yeah. So Sound Transit is in a budget crisis, and I know that you and your council colleagues wrote a letter kind of stressing that, and kind of what is the goal of that, and how are you working to protect Pierce County projects and Tacoma projects?
And to be abundantly clear, this isn't even just a Tacoma issue. Obviously, my primary responsibility, my council colleagues' primary responsibility is to advocate for the people we directly represent. But as people who also serve on a regional body, we also have responsibility to the folks that we serve through this wonderful program. And part of my biggest contention isn't just that this is something that Tacoma taxpayers have been very patiently, very generously supporting for all these years, and people just all walks of life want to see a tangible return from what they pay for. That's the whole thing. It's not like people are 100% opposed to revenue for more services, but people really do want to see a return for it, and that's the biggest. At the worst end, sense of betrayal or really just skepticism. So it's our hope that this isn't even just about the T-Dome extension, but really about basic connectivity for the region. I would put forward that is just as beneficial for someone up north, like in Seattle or Everett, just as much as it is for someone who is able to take the link out to the airport. It benefits the entire region. And we have super strong advocates like Councilmember Walker, for example, and others who are directly leading the charge. I myself and others, Chanel, we're continuing to lead that argument that it is unacceptable to pull back on this really crucial node. It's not simply for Tacoma's benefit, but for the benefit of the entire spine itself, leading that. So we're going to continue making that argument. We're going to continue pushing for the most responsible budget process that we can find that's not just simply gimmicks, but actual real sustainable decisions that benefit everyone.
Can I add to that? Sure. I really appreciate the mayor and city council's strong advocacy for some transit investments. So thank you, Mayor. I know you had some transit recently at a study session to really get a briefing. I really encourage, we're probably all here because Tacoma On the Go invited us. So continue to watch for action alerts and advocacy opportunities that I know Tacoma On the Go will help guide us with. This is really important, so please pay attention. Our window of opportunity, I serve on the Sound Transit Board on behalf of Pierce County, and I appoint the Pierce County board members to Sound Transit. We are scheduled to make a decision about the future of the Sound Transit capital plan for the next 20 years. By the end of May, by Memorial Day. That's the current date. It might slip into June because of how complicated this is. It might slip into June. But for planning purposes, Memorial Day. So the time is now to engage. Please look out for action alerts from Tacoma On the Go. I want to emphasize, our number one priority is getting linked to Tacoma Dome. We are going to do everything we know how to make that happen. There is more than link light rail to be delivered from Sound Transit. Sounder train service, commuter train service is really popular and serves communities like Sumner and Puyallup and Auburn and South Tacoma and Lakewood, and it's planned to go all the way to DuPont. So Sounder train service serves a really important need. We're advocating right now with dead ends in Lakewood. Part of the Sound Transit 3 plan is also getting that Sounder train service down to DuPont and getting more frequent train service. Harder than you might think, because we share the rail line with Burlington Northern Santa Fe. If you ever had to negotiate with a railroad, it's no joke. But that is another. For all kinds of reasons, light rail to Tacoma Dome has like 99% of everyone's attention. It is super, super important. We are going to get there. It is our number one priority, and you need to know everything else that you're paying for. You're also the plan is getting Sounder train service to DuPont and more frequent train service. And another important project is extending Tacoma Link. Right now it goes from Tacoma Dome through downtown up to St. Joe's Hospital. In the plan, it's to get to Tacoma Community College, so extending T-Link to Tacoma Community College. The Pierce delegation is working really hard to preserve as much of that project as possible and advance the extension of T-Link to as far as we can go. So there's a lot going on here. Please listen to Tacoma On the Go when they give you an action alert, and please take action.
We had someone from Sound Transit here talking about transit-oriented development. And he said, we asked him, how's it picked? How's it chosen? And he was like, the board does it. So, your eyes on you. My next question, how do you ensure, and I think both of you could speak to this question, how do you ensure infrastructure stays safe in conditions? There's lots of parts of town where the streets are, not great. There's lots of parts where there's no sidewalks, or if there are sidewalks, they're not in good repair. And I know this is one of the things I learned when I came to the city, and I had a very, lively conversation with my mother, who was like, well, I pay taxes for the street because I drive a car, so I don't want to take my street to give to a bicycle. And it was a very lively conversation. But there are a lot of people using the streets in different ways, and there's not just the repair, there is the ongoing maintenance, and we are constantly having to deal with it. What are some of the things you guys are working on to address that?
Listen, that's kind of a local question. So there are a few things, both short-term and also systematic. So the short-term, we need dedicated local funding for it, and that's why the crucial conversation we're having this August is really important, because we have infrastructure that is way past its expiration. And we see this in our neighborhoods, we see this in our key corridors. And it's not even simply the decrepit infrastructure, you know, the pothole dig, if you remember that, but it's also the opportunity cost of what more could we have. I mean, we should also learn from our successes just as much as from our setbacks. And if you consider, like who's familiar with East 64th Street Capital Project, the corridor there? Yeah, that is absolutely worthy of applause. That is a success story for everyone else. I mean, speaking as someone who not only interacts with the department and the people who made that possible, I actually spoke with the contractor who did that thing yesterday, for example. It's how cool it is to learn about the ins and outs there. But just as a candidate last year, talking to all the people who lived around it, the real win wasn't simply slower traffic speed and just a shiny new road, but it was also the forestry that was a part of the project. It was also the protected bike lanes, stormwater management, and just the sense of place and safety. You know, there's more parents with strollers rather than, you know, maybe less than savory activities, right? And that was not lost on the neighbors around there. And so being able to do more of that and being able to do it sustainably is really crucial for us to do. Back to transportation being related to other stuff, you can't talk about transportation without also talking about housing and permitting. So as we talked about, how we're going to sustainably pay for other updates to infrastructure, like, you know, the boring and crucial stuff like sewer, water, for example, is how do we reasonably fund these things? If you look at things like impact fees or fees in lieu or other things, while at the same time ensuring that builders can still have projects penciled. So just thoughtfully bringing people together in a collaborative way to make sure that we're doing that. But ultimately, this is systematic. We were at a failure point for infrastructure, not because of any one thing. I mean, any city of our age in our tax base is having the same problem. It's because we have a tax system that is unfair and is set up to fail. I mean, one key example of that is just our property taxes, which the schools can relate to very intimately as well, is that because of very specific policy decisions by basically conservative initiative shills, like you might have from the past, for example, is you literally have a revenue stream that is always declining every single year in real tax dollars, right? So the amount of property taxes that anyone can collect in Washington State is capped at only a 1% growth rate per year. What is inflation in a good year? That's easily double or triple that, and, you know, thanks to the Iran war and Trumpflation and what have you, it's, you know, exponentially higher these days. And so your revenue is down. It's not like things are getting any less expensive anytime soon to maintain. And so you always have these terrible budget decisions of, do we kick the can down the road with deferred maintenance, which just makes it more expensive, in other words, roads or capital facilities, or you drop cable and you cut services, which is actually literally the intention of these people. Like if you're feeling conspiratorial today, look at Grover or like seriously, like actual like libertarian doctrinaires who want to privatize services by making them shitty prior, right? And so that is actually a stated purpose of these things, right? So how to fix that is to do the exact opposite systematic. Is to have progressive revenue reform. It's to set up our tax system to be fair as well as stable, so that our services can actually get better with time around.
I would, the only thing I would add is that, you know, at the county, I mentioned our number one priority is safety on our transportation network. That's absolutely our number one priority, and that's a shift from a couple of years ago. Closely behind that number one priority is safety, is preservation and maintenance of our existing system. And preservation and maintenance of our existing system, you know, I submit is important to all of us, no matter how we choose to get around, whether you're drive a car, take transit, ride a bike, walk around. A good transportation system, a smooth road is good for all users, no matter what the mode is you choose to get around.
Oh, I think this might be our last question, but electric vehicle charging infrastructure is frequently vandalized, and there are challenges with access for multi-families. We know that there's, you know, people are seeing the cost of the gas pump and considering electric, and so this is a big topic for them. So how are you addressing this? How are you looking at, I know, it's kind of goes back to one of the things you said, Brian, about the federal administration de-incentivizing some of these things that we spent a couple of years really trying to push people to that. Now stuff federal does kind of working against electric cars as well. So what are the things that are being done about the infrastructure and accessibility for that?
Yeah, we have an electric vehicle infrastructure plan that the county is working on for the entire county, whether you're in the city or not. If you want to learn more about it, I know Lauren Flemister and the folks who work for her in our sustainability team called the ORCA team, which stands for Office of Resilience and Climate Action. They're working on an electric vehicle infrastructure plan for the entire county and how we make equitable delivery of electric vehicle infrastructure. So talk to Lauren more after this if you have real interest in this. Something the county did a couple of years ago is we changed our code that's you're building a new house. You have to make and you have a garage instead of new house. You have to make the new house electric vehicle ready. You don't have to have an electric vehicle charging station in that garage, but it has to be EV ready. So the power has to be on site so that if you wanted to then bring an electric vehicle charger in there, it's ready to go and you're not doing it after the fact. So those are some of the things that the vandalism on electric vehicle infrastructure is real. I'm not an expert on it, but I called someone at Tacoma Power reached out to me one day recently, and I know they have something that they've been tackling this issue head on, and they have some new technology, some new something that I'm clearly not fluent in, that is really helpful in this regard. And I know I put them in touch with my team to say, go do what Tacoma Power is doing to like stop the vandalism. Very eloquent, I know.
Love it.
And this is actually an issue near and dear to my heart. Ryan and I happened to both, maybe council members back in the day, but in 2018 or 2019 with those errors, and we did the same thing for the city. I think we were able to get it done with commercial, but not residential for the code requirements, like the developer lobbying on this, but yeah, there's definitely an appetite for that. But just having a secure place, especially with multifamilies, to just have structured parking and just have the development have 220 wiring there, so if you so choose, it's there, right? And then maybe you know that some incentives to the developer actually puts the 220 volts there, right? So some of it could just be basic code plus incentive. Again, in spirit of intersectionality, you can't talk about this without also talking about equity and safety. So as we look at a really thoughtful plan, which did do a higher job. One of Tanisha's proteges that I saw correctly talked about. We pushed the health departments, and there's all sorts of pushing going around. But yeah, one thing that shocked Tanisha's protege, and we're all sharing policy up here, is what's called the community safety action strategy, which besides the obvious responsiveness to crime and safety concerns through public safety agencies, is also about longer term looking at the environmental factors. So like the equity index, the social indicators of health, and also just basic local government stuff, like are there enough street lights? Where are the trees? Where are the trees in the neighborhood? Where are actual environmental factors that we know make people feel safer, make neighborhoods that have a greater sense of place, sidewalks, curb and gutter, bike lanes, just sense of investment, right? And we've seen this with the winds, like just where the Lincoln district is right now, for example, compared to where it was 10 or 15 years ago, right? Infrastructure and changing environments, literally, it doesn't change human behavior, but it strongly influences it. It makes much more room for the good stuff, right? I mean, how few trees do you see in 9402, for example, right? So that's where I go when I think of EV charging and security, but it's far bigger than just the one thing, right? It's bigger than just the technology. It's about sense of place and just aligning with all of our policies and just enhancing the quality of life and doing so everywhere.
Thank you. I told you this time is going to go really fast, and we are just about out of time. So I want to say thank you to both of you for being here. Thanks for having a great conversation. This was a great way to wrap up the Friday forums for this year. You guys have homework. You are to read the Pierce County Comprehensive Plan by next year, or it will be a quiz. You also can take your time to read Tacoma's Comprehensive Plan. It's fascinating reading. As someone who tried to understand it when I first came to city government.
We're going to email center.
Yeah, and email center. So that is also on your homework assignments till I see you again next January. Thank you so much for being here. It was so great to see so many faces in the room that we know and have worked with and have challenged us and questioned us and pushed us to be better as a city. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Laura, and thank you so much.
All right, round of applause. I know we could keep talking forever, and there were a lot of really great questions. So thank you everyone for getting those submitted and for coming out. And thank you so much to Mayor Ibsen and Executive Mello for coming and having this conversation with us. I want to follow up on what Executive Mello said about staying tuned for action alerts regarding sound transit. We'll be sending something out next week telling you about what we think are the biggest priorities and how you can help your voice be heard so we can maintain our Pierce County projects. If you want to learn more about that too, we will be back in this room on April 27th with Executive Mello and Tacoma City Council member and fellow Sound Transit Board member Christina Walker to be talking about sound transit issues specifically. There's some registration pages around the table. I'll put it in the Zoom chat too. But come join us for that as well. We have recorded this forum. The recording will be available probably on Monday on our socials if you want to share it with all your friends and be really, really cool. I also recommend that you go to tacomaonthego.org. We are going into full events season. We have events all summer long about walking, biking, transit, history, community, all this stuff. So stay engaged with us. We'd love to see you at events this summer, and consider making a donation to support our work. Our events are always free to attend. They are not free to put on. So you can find more information at tacomaonthego.org. And with that, I will set us all free. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.